another two.
All right. Hey, everybody. Sorry if you can't. I'm going to try to put it closer on Instagram Live until we can get the sound. But thank you all. And you can go to my YouTube or Facebook and watch us again on that. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. We're going to get right into it. Welcome to Disrupt the Chaos. I'm Rosa Clemente. Our mission with the show is to keep everybody informed and inspired, one guest, organizer, or disruptor at a time. And I think I want to start right now with the video, part of the video of the press conference that Rayshard Brooks' family had yesterday in Atlanta, Georgia, with their lawyers. Hey, everybody. Sorry if you can't hear, but definitely go. Or maybe you have a wireless speaker or something.
My Uncle Rayshard. On June 12th, one of our biggest fears became our reality. Not only did we lose another Black, unarmed male, this time it landed on our front doorstep. Blessing, memory, and dream will never get to see their father again. Not only was he a girl dad, he was a loving husband, caring brother, and most importantly to me, an uncle I could depend on. Rayshard Brooks was silly. He had the brightest smile and the biggest heart and loved to dance since we were kids. Me and my uncle are both 27 years of age. 27 years of age. No one walking this green earth expects to be shot and killed like trash in the street for falling asleep in a drive-thru. Rayshard has a family who loves him, who would have gladly came and got him so he could be here with us today. The day after my uncle's murder, his oldest daughter set for her father in her birthday dress to come and take her skating. And to look across the room and know that it's never a possibility anymore breaks my heart. Me and my family are still grieving the loss of my grandmother when my uncle's life was horrifically taken away from us. Not only are we hurt, we are angry. When does this stop? We're not only pleading for justice, we're pleading for change. Zone 3, where my uncle was killed, is the same zone we represented and loved all our lives. We stood with the Atlanta Police Department when they were just tearing up our city and said, this doesn't happen here, leave them alone. And here we are 3 weeks later, those same police took something away from our family that we'll never get back, Rayshard Brooks. Most of us haven't slept or eaten since we viewed a video of a man being murdered to only get a phone call moments later to tell you it's your loved one. This entire situation has traumatized me and my entire family, I'm sure for the rest of our lives. My uncle did not die in vain. His life mattered. George Floyd's life mattered. Breonna Taylor's life mattered. Michael Brown's life mattered. Sandra Bland's life mattered. I'm not only asking the city of Atlanta to stand with us, I'm asking for everyone in this nation to stand with us as we seek justice for Rayshard. Thank you.
And that was the family of Rayshard Brooks. The press conference went on longer and it just became sadder and sadder. And when I was watching it, it was about, it was yesterday, W. Kamau Bell said, actually on Sunday on one of the news shows that, not only do the families have to go and his friends and everybody in the community have to go through this, also that the family is never given time to grieve or mourn, and that's true because every time we see an act of murder by the police, a whole family is impacted. And before they can even think about what a memorial will look like, will they be able in this time of COVID to have a funeral and all of that, which they were able to. I mean, they haven't been able to have like George Floyd's family, but the idea that you lose a family member, especially in this way, and then you really don't have time to mourn or grieve because you have to be at a press conference 2 days later saying that you need justice and saying that you're going to be there. So it was a rough one to watch. I've never seen a press conference except for probably Mrs. Diallo where the family, was so shattered and they broke down like that. And one of the lawyers for the family said, sadly, I'll probably be here in a couple of months. And I said, maybe, but you'll probably be here next week because, if we look at the report from the Malcolm X grassroots movement in 2012, where we documented and showed research where every 28 hours, an African-American man, woman, or Native American man or woman are killed, and even then we did not count queer or LGBTQ identifying people. So those numbers would be actually maybe every 20 hours. But for some of us that have been doing this work, sadly, we know that there might be a lot of this. And, the political strategists would tell if, they were strategizing with the officers and the unions or that, you would think that at this moment, this heightened moment that we're at, that cops would just be chill, right? Like, you're going through all this and ultimately murdering a person. And there were a lot of people. There were gunshots, and I saw a report of a father who had their baby in the car and a bullet hit his car. And there's other video that's going to come out. But if you look at the whole footage, you'll see it was like Friday night at Wendy's. 20 cars are lined up. It's lit. It's in like a strip mall shopping plaza. And the police still killed them. And now what the police unions are trying to say is that it wasn't a murder, but in the cases that have been tried or tried to be indicted against the police, the state of Georgia. So if it's not a lethal weapon for officers, even though they tase people 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 times, then it's not a lethal weapon in Rayshard Brooks's hands. So tomorrow we'll know more if what the cops will be indicted for and who and what this process will look like. So I think it's important to acknowledge that there's been other brothers and sisters and non-gender conforming people that have been killed while we've been focusing on George Floyd. Even before George Floyd, we have Breonna Taylor and Tony McDay, a Black trans man who was killed by the police. And last week, we had Eric Salgado and his partner, maybe his wife, Breonna, who's pregnant. And Eric Salgado was shot in Vallejo, right outside of Los Angeles. And he was shot over 40 times. And, when I heard that, I was like, this is like the Diallo, when Amadou Diallo, almost 21 years ago, was shot 41 times. Like, how do you shoot someone 40 times? And by whatever grace or whatever you believe in, his partner wife did not die, and she's in the hospital now, and she's pregnant. And when I was reading that, it took me back to like when Fred Hampton was assassinated by the Chicago police and the FBI, how they shot hundreds of times in that house and killed Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, but Akua and Jerry, who was 8 months pregnant with Fred Hampton Jr., survived. And you're like, that's an act that you can't really attest to anything but some spirituality, or for those that believe in God and Jesus were really there at that time. And then yesterday in Albuquerque, New Mexico, there were protesters who were at a statue that they felt needed to be torn down because it represents colonization, but particularly the taking of land of indigenous people and the purposeful genocide of indigenous people. And there was white supremacists, white militia that were there that shot a protester. We don't have the name of that person right now, and they're now in the hospital in critical condition. But, I hope folks take a look at this, because what happened is that at one point, people couldn't discern what was the cops or the white supremacists and militia. They say they couldn't distinguish who were the cops and who were the white militia supremacists that shot out into the crowd. And for me, there is no distinguishing. They're all the same. They're white supremacists, mostly white men who are militarized and can come up, not only at a protest in New Mexico, but they can go in guns, holster and all that when they were fighting for the movies and nail salons and all that to be reopened in Michigan. So the idea that people cannot even discern who was a white supremacist and who wasn't, I would counter that with saying, most cops are all white supremacists. I mean, that's how I feel. And that's what they're doing. And our history proves that this is what they were doing. So, we have to keep our eye on what is being kind of erased at the moment. And then lastly, I don't even really want to talk about Dude's press conference today because it was as normally as it was a shit show of lies and him finding some people to stand with him. But I was thinking this weekend as well that we have to keep our eye on what Trump and his team are doing, or let's say the team behind Donald Trump is doing every day to take away more and more of our rights. So what we're focused on, what is the circus and him as kind of the circus leader, we have to be aware that they're doing so much around Environmental Protection Agency. They're restricting a lot of things. They are changing policy under our noses while we're, as we should be, focused on what is this police violence and police murder by the state. But we need also people that are focused on what he and his team are doing every day. They're signing secret executive orders, they're changing things, and we're not even being told about them because this is the moment that we're in. So soon we should have our sister Linda Sarsour. But I did want to start. Oh, thank you. Thank you for the comments, everybody. Well, before I start, I also want to say that I think we're now at 3 Black men, maybe 4, that have been found in this last week. They have been found hanging from trees. And all the reports say that these 3 Black men, again, I think another one happened in the last couple of hours where people are finding out. They're saying that 3 Black men hung themselves on trees and committed suicide. And I think all I have to say about that is I would gather these are lynchings. And I know people don't want to think that. And I know a lot of the mainstream media thinks that we might be all these conspiracy theorists, but when was the last time we heard of 3 Black men in 1 week, 2 in Southern California, found hung by trees? Yeah, think about that. And I think I was telling our producer, Tandi, or I don't know who I was telling this to, but, for me right now, where are all these white supremacists? Where are they? I think they're training. I truly think they're training and preparing for a race war. I believe that. I think they're getting ready for the fact that if Donald Trump is not elected, how do they keep him in office, or what does it mean? Or is he going to maybe cancel the elections? These are things that a lot of us as organizers are actually talking about. And we have to just be real, I'm sure they're training in some militia camp in Utah or Northern Washington or the middle of Iowa or all these states, but they've been kind of silent. And I would say they're being silent for a reason. And then, of course, if he is voted out, is he really going to leave? Like, do people think he's just going to walk softly into the good night and say, it's been great. America's amazing. I made it great again and I'm out. Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah. So, hey, Tawny, can you pull up one of Linda's videos so we could make sure she's able to get on? I'm going to check in if you could pull up one of her videos.
This for me is an act of resistance.
Thank you.
To be able to say, this is who I am. And for people to see that my journey is not just of mine alone, but of many people that are around me. I'm an activist, an organizer, and most importantly, a mom. I'm born and raised in Brooklyn. And every day I wake up in the morning and I figure out how to build power amongst people of color. So anything from immigration reform to healthcare for all people, to police and law enforcement accountability, to the rights of Muslim Americans to practice their religion freely in America. I love my people so much that I want them to live in a country that loves them and embraces them for who they are. Being unapologetic about who you are is a journey, and it requires a community and a family that instills in you who you are, where you came from, and what your responsibility is to the lineage and heritage in which you come from. And for me, my true, authentic unapologeticness came immediately after the horrific attacks of 9/11, and watching here in New York City as a born and raised Brooklynite, seeing the type of treatment of Muslim Americans who are now seen as like a suspect community with something that had nothing to do with us. And just watching men in my community be taken away from their homes, watching raids on my community, it got me to a point where I said, this is not okay. And then venturing out into the world and seeing that my community was not an anomaly, that this type of injustice and profiling of communities was happening already to African Americans and already to Latino communities and undocumented and other folks. And so for me, I decided not to be a bystander. And I think I believe that all of us could make that decision. It doesn't require for me to be an organizer or an activist. It doesn't require for me to have a particular skill. But I chose to stand up for what I believe in, no matter the consequences. And unfortunately, there have been many consequences for someone like me. I have received a type of backlash that I quite honestly was not expecting. I did expect people to challenge me. I expected people to vehemently disagree with me, but I did not expect death threats. I didn't expect to be harassed, to be bullied, to be smeared, to be vilified, and really to be made out to be someone that I'm not. And I think the important part of my telling of my story is exactly that I'm going to tell my story, that I'm going to allow people to join me on the journey of my life that got me here to be an activist and an organizer and a leader in this country, particularly resisting fascism and white supremacy and all forms of racism. And I want to be able to tell people who I am in my own words and not just those of others.
So before we bring Linda on, I do want to read part of the end of her memoir, which, I mean, my daughter loved it. I loved it. I read it in 2 nights. So, and in it, she's talking at the end. The chapter is called Love Is Not Done. And she's talking about a brother named Saheed Basal that was shot fatally by the police. Everybody in the neighborhood knew him. They knew that he had bipolar. So they never obviously saw him as a threat. And her father, who owned what we would call a bodega, if people don't know what that is in the city, and said and her father messaged her and said, there's a protest for Shaheed tonight. And Linda said, I'll be there. She says, I was at the office of Justice League New York City with Carmen and Tamika when I got his text. I told them where I was going, and they both said they were coming too. That evening on the corner of Montgomery and Utica, hundreds of my Brooklyn neighbors thronged the street. Mental illness should not ever be a death sentence. Some of the protesters chanted while others yelled murder again and again. Several speakers pointed out that the police could easily have subdued Shaheed without killing him. Now standing a block from the place where Linda Sarsour's Spanish and American Food Center has served the neighborhood for 35 years, I was flooded with memories. I hardly noticed when someone handed me a megaphone, but as I lifted to my lips, I feel the pain of Shaheed's loss and the conviction that he deserved better, that we all deserve better. Shaheed was one of us. We will fight so that what happened to our brother will not happen to anyone else. After I finished speaking, I handed the megaphone to the next person, my eyes searching for Carmen and Tamika on the crowded street. Both women with fists in the air were chanting justice for Shaheed. Their eyes burned in the twilight. Soon the street lights came on, illuminating the faces of people I had grown up with in my beloved Brooklyn, and the 2 women who had now marched by my side. As I made my way through the roar of voices towards my sisters, my own fist pumping in the air, no one but God heard me whisper, this is where I belong. So with that, I want to bring on our sister Linda. And well, you already know how I feel about you. So, we're trying to keep this tight because everybody's got mad things to do on the top of every hour. But I just want to say thank you for your courage and your leadership. And what I really found great about the book was your ability to read all that you wrote and visualize yourself there as an organizer. And how did you do it? You were organizing and you wrote a memoir. How did you do that?
First of all, I just want to say how much I love you, Rosa, and for your consistency and solidarity over the many years. You're a real one, and there aren't many like you in our movements, and I hope that everybody knows that. It took me about 2.5 years to write this memoir, exactly for the very reason that I'm an organizer. That's where my heart is. I'm on the street. This quarantine has literally killed me for 2 months, and I was like, I got to get back on the streets. Being able to write a little bit, have people around me who help support me, to think about what were those, what were those transformative moments? What were those times in my life that I felt like radicalized me or put me here? And usually people think of the more like regular things that happen, like when you have a baby or like, all the kind of, and for me, sometimes it was just a conversation that happened or an interaction that happened or something I observed or something where I happened to be somewhere that really changed my heart in a way or my mind. And so 2.5 years of just thinking about that, putting it together in a book and making it accessible. You and I, Rosa, talk about this all the time. Like there's a lot of language we use in the movement that is not accessible to our people. And I want to be able to talk to the regular, person who's not, doesn't have a PhD, may not even have a high school diploma, but can still have an entryway into movement work and into organizing and into being somebody that makes the decision, like, I'm not going to be a bystander with all that's happening around me. So 2.5 years later, and it happened.
Yeah. And I mean, I think one of the most things that we've seen in the last couple of years is, to be honest, I probably wasn't looking, but I also never saw a lot of younger Muslim women, right, wearing the hijabs within our movement where they felt safe, and I think you're one of those people that has made it visibly as safe as can be, but also obviously getting so many trolls and death and all these things you've gone through. When you meet a younger sister in a hijab, are you like, yeah, that's what I'm talking about?
Rosa, I mean, I overcompensate a lot for my people. And because I want every Muslim girl and woman across the world to see someone like me and say, I could say what I need to say. I could be a truth teller. I can defend my people. And, when I get trolled all the time. And I always say to people, I don't understand what you expect from me. Like, I'm expected to defend my people, just like Rose is expected to defend her people, just like Black, activists like Tamika want to defend their people. And so I'm going to continue to defend my people. And when a young little Muslim girl, like for folks, like when you look at my book, right? And a lot of people probably are like, why is my big face on this book? I wanted actually to put a picture from one of the No Muslim Ban protest on my book. That was like the picture that I envisioned to be on the front cover, where it was Muslim sisters and hijab on the front of my book. And my editor at Simon & Schuster, who's a brilliant Black woman named Dawn Davis, was like, no, it got to be your face. And she said, imagine a little Muslim girl walking into a Barnes & Noble or into an independent bookstore and walking in and seeing a bold, brave, shoulders back, head high woman in a hijab. And so understanding that I also do represent something for my people at a time where we've been under attack for at least at the minimum for the last almost 20 years since the horrific attacks of 9/11. So for me, I choose to wear hijab, and I think it is an act of courage in this moment. As you know, hate crimes against Muslim women who look physically like me have been targeted in different parts of the country, discriminated against in employment. And I want women to see me and say, I'm going to be unapologetic about who I am. And I hope that is what I give to sisters across the world.
Yeah, and I think it was a good thing that you were on the cover, because my daughter was like, oh my God, Linda's on the cover. And I'm like, yeah, she's like, I don't really want to talk about you. I want to follow Linda. And I'm like, that's good, but I have purposely always checked in on you. And I think it's been my past experience with being called an anti-Semite. And that happened when there was no social media.
That's right.
There's a little feedback on the audio. We don't know why it's happening. So we probably need audio engineers. If anybody wants to get those volunteer services for us, we would invite them. But it brought me back to college. And I think I told you this story. When I was a student at this university at Albany here, in 1993, I became president of the Black Alliance. And every year we would bring up Kwame Ture. People might know him as Stokely Carmichael. He was Kwame Ture, and he was also the elders in the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And we had a lot of folks on our campus that were part of that. And we had never been told not to bring a speaker until we brought him up.
Wow.
And the president, who was Black at that time, happened to be in Israel. And he was trying to get some funding for the university. And they were straight up like, well, if you bring these anti-Semites, to your college, we're not giving you any money. So because that happened, he shut us down. We still got Kwame Ture on the campus. I could talk about how that happened, but the point is we got him on campus, and the next day I was expelled. Not officially, but I was put on notice that I was going to be expelled. And if it wasn't for all the organizers and all the people in Suba, I don't know where I'd be right now. I would have been expelled from school, not really understanding why. And then when you started going through all this is why I called you and was like, yo, this is a whole different level. And in fact, when I went through that, I had two times people broke into the house that I was living in. And another time I was walking home from campus after a late meeting, and someone came out the car and threw a brick at me.
Wow.
And I didn't really connect that until I told some other people, and they're like, girl, those are Zionists. They're straight following you. Even with all that, I don't feel I lost anything. The whole point of me telling that story is that it's really small compared to what you've been through, and I don't actually want to put too much into that, except to say that the way you've handled it, I really don't know how you handle it with grace. That's my whole point. How do you handle it with grace? Because you have this thing about you where you're like telling someone off, but it's real nice. So you don't know until you know.
Rosa, like you're a student of history, and that's what I appreciate about you. Everything for you is contextualized, and I feel the same way about how I approach the movement and I approach even the attacks that come my way. This. There has never been a revolutionary in our history, whether it be in the history of Puerto Rico, the history of Palestine, the history of the United States of America. You name the place, Cuba, Chile, anywhere you look around the world, anytime there was ever someone who was revolutionary, who stood up against the status quo, who challenged empire, who challenged colonialism, who challenged all the ills, and didn't get attacked and vilified. That just never happened. Like, you can't give an example of someone who went up against powerful people and didn't feel the wrath of that. And so for me, it's like, I'm just looking at it like, why would I think that I would be more honorable or more immune to that type of vilification? Like, what makes me better than those that came before us? So that's really for me why I've been able to take it with grace, because I'm a student of history, and I know that, and I knew this was coming. And for me, when I'm in a place when I always tell people, let's debate. You got something to say. Let's be on a stage together. Let's have a conversation. And there has been many times, Rosa, where I would be invited to a college campus and people would make drama about it. And everyone's like, oh my God, you can't bring this lady to our school. And of course I always end up going, right? Because it's academic, free speech and academic free expression. And no one can tell any student group that they can't bring me to the school. And any time, Rose, I've ever been in a school where someone got up to debate me, I beat them every time. Why? Because my arguments are rational and my arguments are rooted in humanity and in dignity. And you cannot argue with a Palestinian woman about why Palestinians deserve self-determination and a life of dignity, right? And I always say, when I'm in a space and people get up and are like, I'm a Zionist or whatever, and I'm like, look, you be what you want to be, right? But I get to have an opinion about it. You don't have to accept my opinion. And so the arguments I've made, for example, that have really resonated with people, I say to people, listen, If Zionism means the self-determination of the Jewish people, that's cool, hold that. But for a Palestinian, Zionism is the self-determination of the Jewish people at the expense of the security and safety and disposition and displacement of the Palestinian people. And as a person who's a solidarity activist, Rosa, what I say to people is that you cannot have safety and security. No people, I don't care who you are, you cannot have safety and security at the expense of another people. So that's why I believe in this idea that our liberation is bound up together. In a place like Palestine, you cannot argue with me when I say that the liberation of the Palestinian people is bound up with the liberation of Jewish people. So if we're not all free in the Holy Land, if we're not all being treated with dignity and respect, if we don't all have basic human rights, then no one gets those rights over others. And when you say that on a college campus, even the people who are like in opposition are like, damn, can't really argue with that. And so for me, I'm just looking for making sure that we all are treated equal, that we are all given the opportunity towards self-determination. I am a person who has a very clear track record of standing up for the most marginalized people with the most marginalized people. And it's hard to pierce my record. My record is public, it's clear. And so I just go through it. And there are only times, Rosa, that it really bothers me is when people mention my children. And I want to say this in a public place again, and I've said it before. You want to vilify me, you want to attack me, you want to target me, you do what you need to do that makes you feel good, but leave my family out of it. And I don't think that our children deserve to have to go through this type of trauma, because my children did not wake up and say, we want our mother to be an activist and an organizer. My children did not decide my life for me, and they should not be punished for what people believe are bad decisions on my part.
Well, I think that's the thing that I also wish in a way I would have done a little bit better at when it comes to my daughter. And, I know people have questioned or been like, well, where's her family? And I'm like, there's a reason. Like, people will find out where they go to school.
Yep.
People will find out where her husband works, and I think you made that very purposeful. And I think that's okay, as long as
I changed my kids' last names, Rosa. It was that serious, right? Like my kids don't have their last name because people are very, my thing is vehemently disagree with me, call me anti-Semitic, call me whatever you want to call me, and that's cool. But for you to dox me and put my address online, for you to be searching information about my children, trying to find out where my kids go to school, telling me, we know you have 2 daughters and a son, which is not private information, but for me to know that you're going to that length of trying to find information. And my thing is look, I am willing to give up everything that I have, Rosa. I got it all on the line, but please leave my family alone. That's all I always say to folks. You can keep doing what you're doing to me and I'll take it. But our kids don't deserve that. Our family, my mom doesn't deserve you mailing stuff to her house where you're threatening her child. My mom don't need to read that. You don't need to be calling my mom's house and leaving voicemails on her little old lady landline. You know what I mean? Where my mom lets me hear these voicemails. And, you know how it is. Old people get shook about this kind of stuff. They hear stories, And so that's my thing. When I get calls on my phone, I don't even tell anybody about it. I just hear it, I delete it, and I go and I walk and I keep going on with my life. But our parents love us, our parents worry about our safety, so it's been difficult for me to not have and be able to have a life where I can just be like, congratulations, my son graduated. You know what I mean? You see people post their kids' graduation pictures. I couldn't do that. On my kid's birthday, sometimes I'll post a picture when they were 5 years old, because I don't want you to know who my kids are and how they look, because I don't want you to target them. And so it's a little complicated and sad, but I got to do what I got to do to keep my family safe.
Yeah, and can you talk about your upbringing, in Brooklyn as a Palestinian? Well, first, let everybody know how you usually announce yourself when you're doing an interview, because I love it. So say it.
So I always say to folks, I'm standing here today, or I'm with you today, unapologetically Palestinian American, unapologetically Muslim American, and unapologetically from Brooklyn, New York, because that's all of the things that I am. Rose, I talk a lot about me growing up in Brooklyn in my book. And I want to just tell people Brooklyn is like a human being to me. I love Brooklyn so much. I love my upbringing. I grew up in a really diverse part of Brooklyn. As you said earlier, when you were reading some from my book, my father owned a store almost for 37 years in a predominantly Black Puerto Rican neighborhood, which is why my father's store was called Linda Sarsour Spanish American Food Center. And my father's
it's
really funny. And I grew up predominantly around Black people in Crown Heights because after school we would go to my father's store where my mom also worked. And then I also went to John Jay High School, which was a predominantly Black Latino high school in the Park Slope around Black people, Latinos most of my life.
Hey, Linda, hold on real quick.
Mhm.
We got helicopters because we live in the capital. They're patrolling.
Oh.
Great. It's amazing to be patrolled by military helicopters all day.
Crazy.
Okay, go ahead. They
Yes.
left.
Yeah, so growing up, I grew up in Sunset Park, which is in southern part of Brooklyn. It's a predominantly when we first my parents first came to America, they came directly to Sunset Park, and that at the time was a very old traditional Puerto Rican community, and then Dominicans came in, and then it became a very Central American community, lots of Hondurans, Mexicans, Guatemalans in the area. So, and then of course, as you know, a large Asian community. So I just was very grateful to live around all kinds of people. The Puerto Rican mom yelling at her kid was the same as the Palestinian mom yelling at her kid outside to come eat, and I just grew up in this beautiful community where all the moms in the neighborhood could yell at you and your mom was cool with it. Everybody looked out for each other. We played tag in the street. And I went to diverse, public schools, and I feel like Brooklyn raised me, gave me that grit, it gave me that kind of edge, and this as a New Yorker, like we don't have filters. Like in Brooklyn, we tell our friends whatever we were feeling, you just tell it like it is. We just kind of have this thing about us, and it's helped me. Like I got to be this organizer. I am a person who does not compromise on my values. I try to keep it real as often as I can. I'm not afraid. I don't care about relationship with this person in power. If you're wrong, you're wrong. When you're right, you're right. And it's kind of how I lived. And which is why, people don't like those kind of folks, which is why I've gotten some of the backlash, because people expect you to, fit into certain places. And I'm just the person that doesn't fit into all the places. And I don't want to fit into all the places. I just want to be me. And I want to be me for my people, because I want my people to be themselves and feel safe and feel like we have something to offer and to contribute in this movement, in this country. And so I love Brooklyn. I'm holding on so hard to stay and live in Brooklyn. But gentrification, the housing market is out of my league and out of a league of a person like me and I love this place. Like, why don't I deserve to be able to buy a home in my place of where I grew up? Like I was born and raised here, and I cannot afford to stay living here. Like rents are astronomical. I have my kids cooped up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. Like, and my kids deserve more than that, but I can't afford to buy $1.5 million, dollar house that also, by the way, probably needs another $250,000 worth of repairs. I just can't do it. And so I feel sad that that the Brooklyn that I love doesn't love me back enough to give me the opportunity to buy a home.
Yeah. I mean, that's real. It's why we're in Albany, New York. So, and you lose so much. But I also feel like New York City, just in general, it has changed to the point. I was listening to this old school rock and roll artist, Patti Smith, who was like, the reason New York was where you had artists and activists is because the streets were looking like how we were living. Mm-hmm. And now in New York, like, I don't want to see 3 Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts on Flatbush. Like, once I saw that, I was like, yeah, we got to go.
Yeah.
We can't live, But you talk a lot in your book about what made you from an activist to an organizer. It was after the attacks in September 11th. And you talk about that so clearly. I do want to ask you, like, what did that specific day look like to you living in New York City at that time?
A lot, like I said earlier, I just love Brooklyn like so much. I was a college student. I was actually at Kingsborough Community College at the time of 9/11. My chemistry teacher was this like mad old white man, like an 80-year-old white man. He was always like, don't take out electronics. If I see you with an electronic, I'm gonna, expel you from the class, all kinds of crazy stuff. And one day when 9/11 happened, the morning of, all of a sudden his cell phone rings, right? It was the most ominous thing that ever happened. Like I had him 2 semesters in a row. Next thing you know, he takes his cell phone, walks out of the class, and never comes back. And everyone was like, oh my God, something bad must have happened, like to his family or whatever. And so 15 minutes later, he doesn't come back. And everyone in the class looks around like, I guess we're all dismissed. And we all walk out into the college campus. Kingsborough Community College is on Manhattan Beach. So it overlooks across, it's in Brooklyn. So it overlooks Manhattan from across the water. And imagine, Rosa, walking out on your college campus, beautiful campus on a beach. And all of a sudden you walk out, you put your hands out, and there's burned paper falling from the sky. It's like raining paper. And you're just still like, there's no Twitter, there's no Facebook, you know, nothing. Right. And so that's like how old I am. Like there was no social media at the time when I was in college. And then you go to the security kiosk and you're telling this, you know, great, like young African-American guy who's there every morning when I come to school, and I go up to him, I'm like, yo, bro, what happened? Like, what's the problem here? And he's like, I don't know. He's like, all I know is something about airplanes hit a building. And I was like, what? And so you know that there's no public transportation. So this is just like, it's just like a movie. Like I walked home all the way from Sheepshead Bay, Brooklyn, to back to Sunset Park, where my mom was watching my 2 kids. I had 2 kids at the time. And I still had no idea what was going on. And one of the most darkest thing that I saw on my walk home is when I got to Bay Ridge, which is on my way to Sunset Park. And the mosque had the gates down. And I never even knew that our mosque had a gate because they never closed the gate. And saw all these Muslim businesses closed. And I was like, why are the Muslim businesses closed? Like, what is going on here? Like, what happened? And it's not until I got to my mom's house, run in the house and see my son, who's like 2 years old. And he's like, mommy, fire, come see fire. And then that's when I sat in front of the TV. And you already know by that time, the loops of the buildings falling. And then at the bottom of the head, you know, the headline on the bottom is like Muslim terrorists and, you know, Islamic terrorists, whatever. And that's when I felt like I wanted to vomit. And so that day was almost like a turning point for Muslims in our country. We went from being like regular, like, you know, New York City, nobody really looked at you twice. You know, we have a lot of Muslims in New York, you know, a lot of Black Muslims been around for a long time. So we never really felt kind of out of place. And our community where we lived had a lot of Muslims. Like our Muslim community was pretty sizable where I lived. You went from basically being just a regular, diverse New Yorker to being a suspect. Basically, your neighbors looked at you differently. In the immediate couple of days from the horrific attacks of 9/11, you know, women were assaulted in New York. We had a lot of volunteers and allies who were literally walking women to send their kids to school, walking with Muslim women to get groceries. And then about a week into after 9/11, some really horrible things that I had to witness happened where pretty much, Rosa, every level of law enforcement came to my community. I mean, there were law enforcement agencies I never even heard of, like NCIS, and they came to Bay Ridge. And what they did was,
you were like, that's not just a TV show. They actually exist.
Yeah, no, seriously. And then so when they came, they were, you know, we have these big apartment buildings, as you know, in Brooklyn. And I remember like there were times where they would just go crashing into a building. Next thing you know, 16 men are being dragged outside. They're literally laying on the sidewalk outside on their stomachs, like people standing over them with big, humongous guns, little babies watching fathers from the window. I remember one day I was at work. I was at the Arab American Association at the time, volunteering before I started working there. And I remember walking out. It was like 7 o'clock. It was dark outside. And I remember it was dark and all I heard was, go back inside, go back inside. And I was like, what the hell's going on here? And our office space was in between 2 coffee shops, like hookah shops, which is very common in our neighborhood. And so me and my colleague went upstairs to see what the hell was going on. And we looked outside and they had raided the coffee shop right next door to us. Same scene, just men on the streets, you know, these are immigrant men who came from police states. They came from Muslim dictatorships. Like this is they didn't come to America for this shit. And for me, like as a Brooklynite and as an American, like I'm not going to lie to you, I wasn't naive. I didn't think the world was so just. But for me to experience and see that happen to my own people and see people who look like my father and my brothers like on the street just shook me. And so from there, the way that I got into activism is I started at the mosque. I was starting to work with women and I started doing translation because men would be picked up. They would go missing for like a week. The wives don't know where the hell did they go, how to find them. And I was studying English literature. Like I wasn't trying to be I wasn't trying to be a case manager. I was trying to be a high school English teacher. So I started translating for these women. We would locate their loved ones at federal detention centers in New Jersey and like outside of Philadelphia, like all these random places. I was working with Brooklyn Law School at the time, who had a clinic, an immigration clinic. And to be honest with you, Rosa, like once I started seeing that, you know, my people needed me, that I had a skill to give, which was that I was bilingual and bicultural, and how much I loved my people and I did not want to see them suffer in this way. And that was like just a few weeks after 9/11. And here I am. And it was supposed to be like a temporary thing. You're supposed to help the people how much you can and then go back to doing what your life was, which is really like my whole thing was like, I wanted to be a high school English teacher. So it's almost 20 years later and here I am. And from there, as you know, just getting so radicalized by the 9/11 experience and then understanding that law enforcement oppression goes back a long time. and seeing the intersections between the unwarranted surveillance and targeting of Muslim Americans to the intersections of stop and frisk and disproportionate policing against Black and brown people, then looking at just surveillance of political activists and just understanding like this shit is all one thing. And so it would require that we have to work together and figure out how to all be in this together. And that's kind of how I became like an intersectional organizer.
Yeah, so we're gonna go to video, but before we do that, of you speaking, but before we do that, you know, the thing was that at that time, we hundreds of us were in South Africa, in Durban, for the United Nations xenophobic and world conference around xenophobia and racism. And I actually sat as a youth, when I was a youth 20 years ago, on the reparations committee. And halfway into the youth part of the conference, there was this huge event with Yasser Arafat, Fidel Castro, Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice. I still have this picture of all, not only, there's like 8 world leaders and then Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice. And we're like, oh, they're representing us. No, they're not. But what it was, even at the conference, they wouldn't let me come in. I had to change my shirt. And I still have the shirt to this day. It's like Free Palestine. And they're like, yeah, you can't come up in here with this shit. So yeah, I have a picture, and a bunch of us were there. So really what ended up happening at this UN conference was, this is where the UN declared that slavery was a crime against humanity and that United States would have to think about reparations. But really, that's not what got the conference stopped. It was about an hour later where we, as the youth delegation around the world, submitted the amendment that said Palestinian people have a right of return.
Yep.
And then that's when the US walked out. So like, they didn't walk out about reparations. They didn't walk around poverty. They got up, and I have the footage where they just both got up and were like out. Mm-hmm. And then we left. I landed in New York on September 11, 20 minutes after the first World Trade Center got hit. We're on this flight, and all of a sudden you hear the pilot. And if anybody remembers New York, you do, Linda. It was one of the clearest, bluest sky days we have ever seen.
Yep.
And the pilot goes, we're landing. There's been an attack. Get your shit. Go to, if you're an American citizen, and go through. I went through the line. There were already military soldiers there. I'm like, Dad, what's happening? He's like, the Second World Trade Center just got hit. And my dad was driving me up to where we lived at that time, Westchester County, which means you got to cross the Bronx Expressway and the Queens Bridge. And everybody was stopped. And we saw the first tower fall. And you're right. We didn't have social media. So we're all like calling each other on landlines, big ass phones.
Yeah.
And the thing was, when I was in South Africa, I had called my mom and said, I don't know what it is, but I got to come home earlier. And she paid for my ticket, right? Because so many of our comrades got left behind for weeks in South Africa. But what really happened after then was what you saw happen in your community, but also in 1 year, the amount of organizations that were attacked or infiltrated by the NYPD. And we know this, especially on Muslim communities, because the NYPD had to admit that it infiltrated the Muslim community. It set up a lot of people, a lot of cases that we don't know about. So coming out of that experience, then seeing like Trump and detention and all that, and then the Women's March.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
That's a lot. I mean,
a lot. I know, but you've done a lot.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I mean, I talk a lot of, I take people kind of on a journey in my book, so there's a lot of explaining, through narrative and through story.
Oh, wait, Linda, my bad. I'm sorry, Tandi. I forgot to play the video. We're just going to play a little second clip of you. Sorry about that.
No problem.
When people, a woman like me walking down the street, they immediately assume many things about me. That I'm not born in this country, that I don't speak English. I'm probably repressed that my husband, or father, or brother have forced me to look the way that I look. I'm a born and raised Brooklynite, very proud of who I am and where I'm from. I speak fluent English. I speak multiple languages. I am confident in who I am. I am strong-willed, and I think that people don't expect someone like me to be that way. And that's all it takes. It takes one person, and it takes a relationship. It takes a conversation for you to be able to delete or eradicate every stereotype that someone has of you. Inequality is when a community is targeted based on their race, religion, or national origin, when it's normal for people to tell you to go back to your country, that you don't belong here, that people who look like you don't belong here. For American Muslim youth, they think this is the norm. They think that being targeted, that the surveillance of our communities, the mistrust of our communities, the discrimination, that this is maybe just how it is. And I think what's important for us as organizers and leaders in the community is to say, no, this is not how it's going to be, and we're going to fight back. It's hard to have this kind of questioning of your identity. You know, can you be an American and a Muslim at the same time? We absolutely believe that you can be an American and a Muslim at the same time, that being Muslim doesn't cancel out your Americanness. I'm a hopeful activist. I want my children to grow up in a country where they can stand on top of the highest building and say, I'm an American, I'm a Muslim, I'm Palestinian, and be so proud. And then for everyone else to celebrate them and to embrace them in all the complexities that they bring.
Yeah, so Linda, that jump from you from September 11th to what would be one of your most defining moments, you know, in history. It's a marker in history, you know, and those are important markers. The Women's March. I mean, first, did you think Donald Trump wouldn't get elected?
Listen, I was definitely not a Hillary Clinton fan, and I still didn't believe that our country is that like rotten to its core that it would elect freaking Donald Trump. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't even for the fact that I thought he was a racist, xenophobe, you know, homophobe, transphobe, Islamophobe, and everything. That was one thing. But he was an idiot. Like he wasn't even like an articulate racist. And so I wasn't really expecting that. And then it happened. And I was one of the people kind of the day after, like, you know, you saw our country kind of went in despair. Everyone was like, oh my God. And, you know, of course, as you know, Black and brown people were looking at white ladies like, really? Like, where have you been all our lives? And so from there, as you know, there was a group of white women that started organizing online this thing called the Million Women's March. And we were all criticizing them online. As you probably remember, I was one of them. I was like, yep, here's some tone deaf white woman that don't understand that this is the 20th year anniversary coming up of the Million Women's March in Philadelphia that was led by Black women. I mean, again, a student of history, I was like, these ladies are out of their mind. And then I went to their page and then I saw them post something about how this is going to be a march in solidarity with like Black, you know, all women, Black women, Indigenous women, and they didn't include Muslim women. And I said, what in the hell is wrong with these women? This freaking Islamophobe literally won an entire election about Islam hates us, keep the Muslims out of the country, surveil the mosques. Like he was saying outrageous things about Muslims like every week. At the same time, Michael Skolnick, who's a white man activist, knew one of the white women and he was like, this is not going to work. You need women of color like to be part of this. And of course, Michael Skolnick knew Linda, Carmen, and Tamika as a package. He said, I know these three women who organized together. You probably need their assistance here. Got in touch with Tamika, and that's kind of how we got connected to those women. And the first thing we did, Rosa, when we went in there, it was like, can't call this the Million Women's March. That's not happening. And so we moved the name of the march to Women's March on Washington. And we also had called Dr. Bernice King, who is Dr. Martin Luther King's daughter, and said, we will not obviously name this march without your permission from the King family, because of course there's the March on Washington and we didn't want to co-opt that either. And she was very gracious. She was like, I trust you, Tamika and Carmen, and I think you're going to, you know, do this with dignity and, you know, with the type of work, you know, because she knew us before. So she gave us the blessings from the King family to use the Women's March on Washington. And while, yes, Rosa, it was one of the most defining moments of my activism career, because as you know, there were no organizers on that team except for like me, Carmen, and Tamika, and a few other sisters of color who had been organizers previously. But the white women, really none of the white women that were on the team with us had ever organized anything in their lives. Majority of them never even marched in their lives. And so while it was a defining moment of my career, it was also one of the most difficult organizing spaces I've ever worked in. As you know, from my journey, I've only organized with Black and brown people. I was in the police reform, anti-police brutality movement. I came out of the immigrant rights movement. So I never really organized with white folks. That wasn't really my thing. And it's not because I didn't want to, it's just that it wasn't the type of organizing that I did. So having to be in a space where we burdened a lot of or shouldered a lot of the education, like, why this, why that, and having to educate white women as we were also organizing a monumental event was very draining. And as you know, we went from a march to an organization. And that might not have been the best decision. Unfortunately, we were not the ones that made that decision, Rosa. White women.
Wait, so Linda, because I want you to go there. I just want to know real quick, when you woke up that morning, all three, you, Tamika, and Carmen,
Mm-hmm.
you get on that stage and you see what's got to be over, I would say more than 1 million. People might argue that, but
Yeah.
I had gone to the Million Man March in October of 1996. And, you know, to this day, they'll say they were like 250,000 people, mostly men. I'm like, no. But when you're on that stage and you just take it in for that moment, what did that feel like?
I mean, when we got there that morning to the place of the Washington, D.C. march, we had already known from MPD, from Amtrak, from different sources that this was going to be some big shit. Like, we already knew it would be big, but we didn't really fathom the type of big. And that morning, when we had finally looked at the numbers of the buses that we had received parking permits for, which we used RFK Stadium to literally park all these buses. So just the people that we knew about, now not the people that organized without us, we had about 2,800 buses that came to that march. That is including sold out Amtrak trains. There was about multiple Amtrak trains that were added to the schedule by the Amtrak company because they were so overwhelmed, right? That is not including the Bolt buses, the mega buses, which are not part of the buses that we were getting parking permits. These are private companies, as you know, that do this all the time. And then MPD in the march told us we had told them, I'm not going to lie, we told them 250,000 people, and we thought that was amazing. Like, we thought we were like the most amazing thing. We were like 250,000 people are going to be here. And MPD, which is the local Metro Police Department, was like, yeah, maybe, what if I told you it's like 1.2 million people? So we basically 1 million extra people came to the Women's March. And, you know, when I went that morning, it was 8:00 in the morning. And if you remember, the program didn't start till 10. And so to stand on the stage at 8:00 to make sure everything was in place, when I looked out on the people that were already there at 8:00 in the morning, I couldn't see the last person. It was that much people. And, you know, we had sound for 250,000 people because we really thought it was going to be 250,000 people. All the seats were full, to the point where MPD, which is again the police department, was like, y'all can't march. And you know me, I was like, what do you mean we can't march? This is called the Women's March on Washington, right? We do marching. And he said, no, you don't understand what I'm saying. I'm not saying that I wouldn't let you march, right? Because I was like, because you know us, we don't do that orchestrated shit. If we're marching, we'll march with no permits. We don't care. Yeah. He was like, no, that's not what I'm talking about. He said, there's nowhere for you to march. Because
there's no room.
Your people flooded every street, every route. Like, so there is no way for you to march. And I said, don't worry, the people will figure it out later. And so I'm not going to lie to you, like, it was a very proud moment for me as a Palestinian Muslim American woman, as a Brooklynite, as a New Yorker, as a mom for my kids, you know, as a woman of color, for women of color, you know, why, especially like having me and Tamika and Carmen, as you know, we were the face of the march. You know, a lot of people, even the ones that were very skeptical, and I was skeptical too, and I was in it. When they saw me, Carmen, and Tamika, the people that were the most skeptical were like, you know what, let me give this a little shot, because Linda, Carmen, and Tamika probably wouldn't go in somewhere if it wasn't going to be like semi-legit. And to be honest with you, we were the ones that made it legit. I mean, we brought our relationships to the table, and we bought everything we had. And it was a very difficult space for us to organize in. But that particular day on January 21st of 2017, we showed the country what it looks like to follow women of color. We showed them the type of high quality kind of productivity we could put forward. If you remember, there was unity principles that we put forth. That wasn't something led by white women. That was what we brought to the table. We were like, we're not marching against no damn Donald Trump. We are marching for something. We are a people with convictions. And so these are the kinds of principles we're marching for. And so that was something we brought to the table. And we also were like, okay, fine. You know, we get the importance, not the importance, but the inclusion of like getting more celebrity voices only for amplification, so more people pay attention. But you remember, Rosa, we had a woman from Flint right, who talked about the water crisis. We had an undocumented Pakistani young woman who came from Staten Island. You know, we had Black trans women. We had people, you know, a mixture of the kind of celebrity / people who really need to be heard. We had mothers of the movement, Tamir Rice's mother, Sabrina Fulton, who's Trayvon Martin's mother, and Jordan Davis's mother. So we were able to bring the mothers of the movement to the space to talk to these women from across the country. And so it was a very—
and when we were watching that, I was watching with Alicia on C-SPAN, because one of our comrades here, Diana Asile, who was at the beginning of the program, but we watched it, and really what I said to Alicia was like, well, maybe this will be the beginning of atonement for the white women that got Trump into office. Like at the end, I was like, some of y'all voted for Trump. You're here trying to atone right now for your sin, like literally. But it was so powerful to see a Palestinian, a Mexican, and an African American sister. I mean, we've probably never seen that before. But I want to ask you one more question, then we'll start to wrap up, because I try to end in an hour. I know everybody's so busy, but there came a moment where you, Tamika, and Carmen had to decide that, you know, we're going to leave this space, something we created and founded. And this space might not be where we want to be right now. And I actually think that takes a lot of courage, because when I look at people in my generation, the hip hop generation, I always go to myself, I stayed in a place too long where I was just being beaten down at this point, and where the forces that don't want freedom are winning right now. So what does that mean for me to, quote, transition or leave? You know, I know y'all made that decision, but for you, how hard was that decision, and how do you feel about it now?
You know, as you know, after the Women's March on Washington happened, we then started an organization, which again, you know, you could look back and say, should there have been an organization? Should we have started one? So that's a whole different episode, and we can talk about that in more detail. But an organization was started, and one of the things we did, Rosa, was that we knew that this was a leaderful movement. You know, we're not in the old heads that want to be part of an organization for 40 years. So we made 2-year terms. That was the intention of us. So our board terms were for 2 years. They started calling for our resignation, as you know, in a lot of controversies. They put us in the first, maybe like when we were on the board for about a year. So we stayed our term. So when we left the Women's March, we had been there for the 2 years. Now we could have renewed our 2 years, right? Because our board, our bylaws did say that we could stay for 2 terms that are consecutive. But we really decided to finish our 2 years, because that's who we are. When I tell Rosa, I'm giving you 2 years of my life, I'm going to give you 2 years of my life. And then I'm going to walk away. And walking away from the Women's March, to be honest with you, reminded me of a lyric. I think it was Nina Simone who said, you know, when you're at a table that's no longer serving love, like you just get up and go find another table to be at. Yeah. And to be honest with you, you know, it was almost a test also, or kind of like a statement. The Women's March, when we were there, Rosa, we organized, not only did we organize the largest single day demonstration in like American history, we also organized the largest women's convention in 40 years. The last one was in 1977 in Houston. Yeah. You were one of our keynotes. That was a powerful place. It was 5,000 women, a third of the women. So 1 out of every 3 women was a scholarship. We brought Indigenous women. We brought young queer trans folks that would never be able to afford to come to a conference. We paid their airline ticket. We got them hotels. They were so ecstatic about being able to participate in that type of space. We organized the largest women-led civil disobedience in history. 751 women got arrested around the family separation when it first kind of became headline news. You already know, we've done the Kavanaugh. Like, let's just be clear. It was the Women's March. And I mean, Carmen and Tamika specifically, who led the strategy around a large civil disobedience that we did for like 5 weeks straight. And I was the first protester to get arrested in the Senate chambers. And so now when you look at the Women's March without us, that's all I got to say. It's like, it wasn't that the Women's March made us, it's that we made the Women's March. Yeah. And so we are proud of where we are right now. We have went on with our lives, went back to a lot of the old organizing that really spoke to us, that, you know, anti-police brutality, criminal justice reform, you know, building Black and brown power. And that's where we are. And I'm so excited to be back. I feel like a whole person. I don't have to explain myself. I don't have to defend myself. I'm accepted into these spaces. I am loved and embraced in these spaces. And I'm also respected for the skills that I bring to the table. And that's what is so wonderful about where we are right now.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, as we would say in New York City, when we're walking away from something, it's like, you heard, we out. Like, we're out. We're good. We try to save y'all. And that's not what we're going to do anymore. So my last question is, now that you have started this new organization with Tamika Mallory, my son, Angelo Pinto, you've been on the ground. What made you decide to start Until Freedom? And actually, you know, you posted something too where you had said, I have never felt this optimistic about our movements in a while. Stay focused. This is the culmination of so many years and so much work and commitment from organizers, activists, communities. This is all you. You know, and I love seeing that, because a couple of weeks I have been thinking about how organizers need to claim our victories and say, you know, we did this. We made a lot of mistakes, but we did this. And the fact that we see out there, I really hate when people are like, white people, white, multiracial. No, what we're really seeing is a rising up of Black and brown young people. And I love that. So you started Until Freedom. Tell us a little bit about that, and then, you know, whatever words you want to leave people with. Especially, I think a lot of young sisters always ask me, how do you keep doing it? How do you go on?
I appreciate that, Rosa. I mean, you know, one of the things is, like, you know, sometimes you start a new organization, but you are a seasoned organizer in the movement. And what's great about Until Freedom is people recognize that myself, Angelo, Tamika, and Mice, like, we've been doing the work. You know, we've been around for a long time. Angelo, as you know, was the leader of the Raise the Age campaign in New York. So he's been doing criminal justice for him. He's a Black Afro Latino, just like you. So he has that kind of intersectional identity. You know, Tamika's been doing this work for over 20 years now. You know, she comes out of the Reverend Al Sharpton National Action Network. And you know, I've been doing this work almost for 20 years as well. So we're basically old heads that started something fresh. And we wanted to build an organization where people saw different types of folks. Like, you got Angelo, he's a movement lawyer. You got my son, who's a hip hop artist and formerly incarcerated. You got Tamika in the movement, who comes, you know, she's a strong Black woman who comes from an old tradition of Kingian nonviolence and kind of the Jesse Jackson, Reverend Al Sharpton type organizing. Then you have me. I'm a Palestinian, a Muslim American organizer, but I'm also a solidarity activist. And I've been working with Black and brown communities outside of my own community for a really long time. And we all bring different things to the table. And so Until Freedom is really a clearinghouse. It's a clearinghouse for activists and organizers, movement lawyers, celebrities. You know, oftentimes one of the things we tell celebrities is, like, you can't go out there on your own. You need to be surrounded by activists, organizers, and directly impacted people, so you know what you're saying. And the ones that are not around activists and organizers are the ones that always put their foot in their mouth and always say the things that are helpful and harmful to the movement. So we've been working with a lot of artists recently. Right now on Breonna Taylor's case, we dropped the video with Alicia Keys and with Rhapsody and with, you know, MC Lyte and Queen Latifah and others to basically elevate the story of Breonna Taylor, to make sure that everybody knows what happened to this young sister who largely has been ignored in the kind of last few months of all the unfortunate trauma and violence we've seen against Black people. And so we're not new organizers, but we're starting something fresh. So it's called Until Freedom. It's a C4 organization, which means we're a political advocacy group. So we don't want to be restricted to the 501c3 nonprofit. So anybody's welcome. We're at untilfreedom.com. We're going to be doing some mobilizations for, actually, this is Tamika calling me right now. She probably wants to yell at me for something, or she has an emergency. But that's
she knows you're on, because she's coming on tomorrow.
And so I'll answer her in a second. And so that's who we are. So untilfreedom.com. And I just will say to sisters out there, like, don't ever let anybody tell you who you are to define you. You define yourself, and remember who you love, remember who you're fighting for, and make sure that's always your focus. Because when you start worrying about the haters and the people who are your critics, that's when you get off your track and off your mission. So stay focused on the people that you love. That's how I stay doing this work. My kids are right there. Every time I wake up in the morning, I'm like, who am I fighting for? I'm fighting for my son. I'm fighting for my daughters. I'm fighting for Tamika's son. I'm fighting for Alicia, your daughter, Rosa. I'm fighting for our children every day. And those are the people that I love and I fight for. Everything else around me is noise. I don't get caught up in all that other stuff. So I love you, and I'm so proud to know you and be your sister and be your friend, and anything you ever need from me. And hopefully folks are supporting on Disrupt the Chaos, because we need this to be some major shit. And me and you should talk about that and figure out what that means. So
Yeah, and we will. And look, tomorrow, everybody, Tamika Mallory's coming on. I'm going to do like a month of just sisters, and then we're going to go to the brothers. So, Linda, I'm going to let you take that call from Tamika. Tell her I said I'll see her tomorrow. And mad love to you, sis. And stay safe. I'll see you soon. Thank you for coming on. Well, thanks everybody. We're going to end tonight, unfortunately, on some really, well, first let me say, I hope you enjoyed that interview. You know, organizers stay organizing, and please share this out. And, you know, it's me and my producer, Tandi. I say every time we do the show, it's a two-woman team right now, and we could use a lot of support if you're into social media. We're probably looking for someone to do more around social media, or hit me up at clementerosa@gmail. And, you know, if you want to even volunteer time, let us know. But we will end tonight with, unfortunately, some heartbreaking news. Our elder, who made the ultimate sacrifice for fighting for his people, Delbert Africa, who was in jail for almost 40 years as part of the Move family. There he is in 1984. I might have the year wrong, but that was the bombing of the Move family, which second to the Tulsa, Oklahoma bombing. Oh, 1978. Second to the Tulsa, Oklahoma bombing of Greenwood, Oklahoma, what is known as Black Wall Street in 1920, was the second biggest bombing in the United States. You know, and it was in 1985 that happened on the orders of Wilson Good, who was the Black mayor of Philadelphia. And Delbert came out 2 years ago, and he had cancer, and unfortunately, late last night, he passed away. You know, and yeah, you know, we're committed to showing all of you a political prisoner or prisoner of war in the United States every night. Tomorrow we'll talk about Jalil Muntakim and the move to free him officially, but please send love to the Africa family. We're going to get Pam Africa on soon, and maybe Mike Africa, to really talk about these last 2 years where comrades have come out, but unfortunately Delbert was sick and he wasn't given the proper medical attention that he needed while he was incarcerated to fight cancer. But I am thankful that we had 2 years of him not being behind those walls. So, you know, what the Move family would say is on the move, and support all political prisoners and prisoners of war. And, you know, send your love to everyone in the Africa family in Philly right now. And again, we just got to be grateful, and we got to understand why our young people are not learning this unless they're growing up in movement households in their schools. The Move family and so many families around victims of the state should be uplifted, and so should they, who, like, he sacrificed his entire life for our freedom. That's what it comes down to. He sacrificed his entire life for our freedom. And please check out the JerichoMovement.com if you want to support political prisoners. So many are over the age of 70, and just on compassion, they need to be all released immediately. And there are people that are working every day, 24 hours a day, to make sure the rest of our PPs and prisoners of war come out. So check out the JerichoMovement.com. So I want to thank everybody for their time and supporting. I want to thank our producer, Tandi. And tomorrow, join us at 7 p.m. You know, we know we're having some technical issues, so anybody wants to help with audio or anything, give us some, you know, tell us what we're doing wrong or whatever. But, you know, join us tomorrow at 7 p.m. We're going to have Tamika Mallory on, another founder of the Women's March, but someone that's been an organizer in her own right for a very long time. And on Thursday, I am so excited that we're going to have Robin DJ Kelly on. The reason I even got my PhD, or finishing my PhD in history, Black history, is because of Robin Kelly. So, you know, when we talk about the Black radical tradition, the Black radical imagination, when we talk about blues and politics and racism, when we talk about racial capitalism, Robin has been a mentor to us, a scholar, and it's just that brother that is down 100 all the time, knowing the role that he is playing, which is always getting our intellectual activism and a scholar activist. So we're excited about that one-on-one interview. And I just want to say to folks, I decided to change this more into a conversational kind of program because there are a lot of good programs out there that give you news, investigative journalism, and all of that. And I'm not an investigative journalist. I'm an activist. I'm an organizer who found some love in doing radio and now doing this show. So I want to have more conversations where we really find out how people are doing, our organizers, how they maintaining, and what are the questions that people sometimes are afraid to ask that I think they need to ask organizers, you know, because we're human beings and we feel pain and trauma and all of that, and we have our ways with coping with it. So you will see one guest, you know, my little editorial, and then we'll always talk about our PPs and prisoners of war. So until we see you tomorrow at 7 p.m., stay safe, stay up, see you in the whirlwind. Peace, everybody. Have a good night, but stay safe.